Tired of doing investment research on stock markets? Wants to go for a walk outside the house with a friend? Introducing iCapital, where you can get investment advice on the go. It is accessible via app and website. Subscribe now to iCapital for stock news. iCapital is reliable because they thoroughly research listed companies, economies, and stock markets. iCapital provides a clear perspective of how markets interact and how it influences your investment. When investors and traders are debating whether to buy or sell their stocks, fret not, as iCapital will recommend Malaysian and global stocks. iCapital is available on Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and Huawei App Gallery. Download it.
Really apologize for all this nonsensical disruption. I don't understand why. We got high quality equipment, we got Panasonic camera, Sony camera, and all that, and then we end up with all kinds of technical problems. So I'm not sure whether you guys can hear. I was told that when I started a while ago, most of what I said could not be heard. Okay, never mind. Let me start all over again, and I really apologize for this disruption. I started off by asking a simple question and wanted to see if you all can just give me a yes or no answer. How many of you think that the US is, whether the economy or whether the country, is a ticking time bomb? Right? Just sending a yes or no, and then it will be very helpful for me to uh, adjust the comments or my comments that I'm going to say in a while. I start all over again. Can we have the first photo, the first diagram? I'm still waiting for the first photo to appear. Can we have the first photo? So can you all see? Okay, now I assume that you can hear what I'm saying. We have already put on a simple image. Can you all see the image? It says Federal Reserve officials continue to see significant inflation. Okay, the person has got no sound, has got sound now. So it looks like it's going to be very unreliable. I hope we can continue this without disruption. It's almost 12 o'clock already. So can we have the first photo again? Can we have the first photo? I hope that you all can see. It says Federal Reserve officials continue to see significant inflation risks that may require more rate hikes. The FOMC had a meeting in September, and a lot of the investors were expecting that the Federal Reserve would come out with some kind of dovish type of statements that either the monetary tightening has already peaked and therefore investors can look forward to interest rate cuts. But what actually turned out was something else totally different. The FOMC paused interest rate, the federal funds rate, but the statement that came from Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve was a lot more hawkish than what they expected. In fact, even after the FOMC, just yesterday and a few days ago, some senior Federal Reserve officials are warning that US inflation still has significant risk and US monetary policy is most likely going to tighten further. And then by next year, interest rate cuts, Wall Street was expecting something like 4 rate cuts. Federal Reserve says, forget about it. You're not going to see that. The essence of what is being said is this: US interest rates are going to go higher and will stay higher longer. That has significant repercussions for both the US economy and the rest of the world. I mean, emerging countries, for example, like Malaysia and so on, our currency rates have been under pressure, not because the ringgit is weak, but because US dollar is strong. It's not just the ringgit. You look at the Japanese yen as well. The Japanese yen has plunged 50%. And now it's about 150. For the yen, the 150 is something like a red line which must not be crossed, because if it weakens to 155, 160, there will be consequences for the Japanese economy and the Japanese stock market. So globally, consequences are serious, domestically as well. Of course, to give you some perspective, can we see the next photo, next diagram? Now this is a bit outdated, but it shows you in comparison the current monetary tightening compared with the previous monetary tightening cycles. The one in yellow, you can see the circle in 2022, right? And the others are like 1998, 1999, 2004, 2015. Those are the previous monetary tightening cycles, right? So the yellow line, which is the current tightening cycle, if you look at the angle, is extremely steep. This chart shows you only the federal funds rate up to only 2.36. The current federal funds rate is really 5 to 5.25. Like I said, this chart is a bit outdated. So if the federal funds rate is going to go up further to say 5.25, 5.5, I'm not sure. We are in uncharted territory. You know, we are in a world where most investors have never experienced before, or even the Federal Reserve officials have never experienced before. You know, it is very unusual. Now, first is the US monetary policy, right? Interest rates. Next, can we look at the next diagram? Debt. This is US debt as a percentage of US GDP. You can see this is from 1970s. That time US debt was only about 30% of GDP, of US GDP. Now, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, is at about 120, 130% of GDP. That's among the highest. The highest in the world is Japan. Japan is at about 250, 260% of GDP. Then you come to countries like US at 120, 130 is at a very risky level. And interest rate is still rising, right? US borrowings are still rising. Next, the other fundamentals that you must pay attention is the budget deficit. This is up to 2022 for US. The last time that surplus was around 1999, 2000. After that, it has been having consistent budget deficit. In the pandemic, in the worst of the pandemic, budget deficit hit 15%. So it's been coming down, but this is not updated. If you update, America's fiscal year ends in October. Yeah. So if you look at fiscal year 2023, the US budget deficit is going to like double. It's going to go up to almost 8-9% of GDP. You could say, what's wrong with that? Many countries have got budget deficit. So again, like I want to emphasize the unusualness of the present circumstances. When an economy faces a recession, a severe recession, typically the country will face budget deficit because the government will use fiscal stimulus to boost the economy, and therefore your revenue is down, your spending is up, therefore you have budget deficit. That's during a recession. What is happening to the US economy now? It is overheating. That's why inflation rate is so high. Unemployment rate is at a level that was last seen 50, 60 years ago. The labor market is extremely tight in America. So you are having a high budget deficit during an economic expansion. What happens when the US goes into a recession again? And I'm guarantee you there'll be the next recession. It's only a question of when. So who knows? If let's say next year the US economy goes into a recession, then what is the US government going to do? Of course, you cut interest rate, assuming inflation allows you to cut interest rate aggressively. Are you going to spend aggressively in your fiscal spending? But your budget deficit is really at 7-8%. You're going to boost it again to double digit? So the Biden administration doesn't realize that his Bidenomics, his style of economics, not only has created sustained inflation, it has created a fiscal crisis because your budget deficit is at 7-8% for fiscal year 2023 at a time when you have almost record low unemployment rate. I'm not sure how, if you read American mainstream media, if you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, you watch the CNN, very few of them warn about this sort of fundamental problems that the American economy is facing. Can we look at the next diagram? Now, this is why you have the UAW, United Auto Workers. This is the union for auto workers in America. Not for all the companies. Tesla doesn't have union. The Toyota doesn't have union. This is for General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford. They've gone on strike. Because, look, the argument is very simple. Your CEO has got a 40% pay rise in the last few years. They've got zero. And the auto workers say that in the last 10, 20 years, their actual salary has declined. In the 60s, the CEO of an American company would earn typically about 20 times the salary of the average American worker. 20 times. That's in the 1960s. Now, the CEO of General Motors, right? Just to use an example, her salary, her compensation is 370 times the salary of the average auto worker. If you are UAW auto worker, look, I'm on the side of the auto workers because they have been extremely patient. You know, the Ford, the Stellantis, General Motors have earned record profit. They have rewarded their CEOs. The CEO of General Motors earned something like 28, 29 million US dollars. And the workers, the wages have not gone up. Who wouldn't be angry? Who wouldn't go on strike? This is ridiculous. So the strike doesn't doesn't come out on its own, because it's not just the UAW strike. The Hollywood workers, there are major strikes across America. This year, up to I think August or July, 7 over million working hours were lost due to strikes. 7 million plus. Last year, the total hour loss in America was about 600 hours. So you can see the anger, the frustration of the average American worker. And this is because the cost of living, inflation has gone up sky high, but their salaries have not followed. Interest rates have gone up, but their incomes have not gone up. How not to be angry? Next. And with all these socio-economic problems happening, with all the major issues that the typical ordinary American is facing, the US government is about to go for another shutdown. Today is 30th September, right? US is about 12 hours behind us. So 1st October, the US government will stop functioning. It's not the first time, it's happened a few times before, but the current situation is different. The current situation is happening at a time when the US economy is in a crisis phase. What happens when the US government shuts down? A lot of economic data will not be available anymore. In other words, if you are the Federal Reserve, if you are Jerome Powell, how are you going to make your monetary policy decision? In a vacuum, in the dark. It's like, you're flying an aeroplane, you're the pilot, you're the captain of an aeroplane, right? All your instruments, all boom, all gone bonkers, and you're supposed to land the plane. How are you going to land the plane? How is the Federal Reserve going to soft land the American economy when I will not have unemployment data, when I will not have inflation data, when I will not have any data that can help the central bank make the correct monetary policy decision? How long will the US government be shut down? No one knows. In the past, it could be a few days, a few weeks, or even 1 or 2 months. The longer it is, the more dangerous it is. All we can say is that this shouldn't happen. You meaning United States of America, you always claim yourself, you are the most capable country, you're the most exceptional country in the world, you're the most democratic country, you're the most blah, 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 blah in the world. But your government sucks, your government stinks. Your government cannot even continue functioning at a time when your central bank needs all the critical data to make the correct policy decision. at a time when your auto workers and other workers in other industries are so angry and striking against unfair wages, and your government stop to exist. You know, it's so serious that the credit rating agencies in America, there are three major ones: S&P, Fitch, and Moody's. S&P has been good, has been correct. S&P downgraded the US credit rating as far back as 2011 when there was a government shutdown. They downgraded it from AAA to AA. Recently, Fitch rating also downgraded. And Biden scolded Fitch rating. How can you downgrade America's credit rating? Gosh, they don't even look at themselves in the mirror. So Moody's, the last one, who is still maintaining a AAA rating for America, warned recently that if America, the politicians, do not act responsibly, they're going to cut their rating. So those are, in a way, symbolical, right? But more importantly, is the underlying message of the US government, the US politicians. You know, if you look at how they argue, how the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tried to convince his own Republican Party to support his measures so that the government doesn't shut down. I don't think I want that kind of. I don't want this kind of democracy, because this is reckless democracy. This is everybody for himself. Nobody thinks of the collective, the good of the collective whole. So the underlying message is you got to be careful with democracy, because when you have irresponsible politicians like those that we see in the US Congress, a lot of nasty consequences can happen. I watched some of the live debates because there's going to be the presidential election next year for US. So I watched the Republican candidates having a live debate. Your Nick Haley, DeSantis, and Mike Pence, and so on and so forth. Their live debate was a shouting match. And it is so pathetic, because all of them were trying to outdo one another in being able to label China as an evil country. Every single one of them was just trying to make sure that they can criticize China more than the other candidate. I mean, democracy is supposed to have freedom of speech, right? Democracy is supposed to be able to respect differences, individual differences, right? So you're not allowed to have a different viewpoint. The only difference is how severe, how stupid your attack is. That's the only difference, and that's democracy. You want to read about democracy? There's a book by Jason Brennan. He's a professor of political science, I think in George Washington University, right? He wrote a book about the weaknesses of democracy. He doesn't believe that democracy can work. But if you want a good book, a good argument as to why democracy cannot work, buy his book, Jason Brennan, JASONBRENNAN, right? So the government shutdown is not just a matter of differences in opinion, it's the failure of a system, the failure of a political system. And this is no good. This is happening in the most powerful country in the world, which is supposed to show good leadership, moral leadership, ethical leadership. but it has failed completely. Next. And you think that that's the end of it, right? I mean, the ordinary Americans, of course, if you're the civil servants, you're the government, you got no job. Next. But that's not the end of this political opera that is always on show in Washington. Because the Republicans now want to impeach Joe Biden. I mean, whether it's political reason or whatever it is, right? Kevin McCarthy says that impeaching Joe Biden is the logical next step. And he's trying to get it going. Government shutdown, a president that may be impeached. Trump was already impeached in the past. Next. So what do you get? You get a country, a society that is declining. You get a country where inequality is worsening at a rapid pace. Remember, in the 60s, the CEO earns 20 times the average wage of the American worker. And now, in 2022, the CEO of an American company earns about 370 times the wage of an average American worker. And then you go down to the streets. This is a photo from San Francisco, the homelessness in San Francisco. I mean, my office is in KL, Jalan Tun HSD. We thought we have a few homeless people scattered here and there around our office. We thought that this is really bad, because we've never seen this before. But wait till you see the homeless in San Francisco, in Philadelphia, all over America. And it's not just the homelessness. The level of crime, the level of security, the US Department of Health. This is the federal government's health department. They told their workers in San Francisco, this is in downtown San Francisco, that they must leave their office by a certain time. Whether 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. They cannot leave later than that. You know what's the reason? Because it is not safe. For security reason, the workers of the Department of Health has to go back punctually. Otherwise, it's not safe for you to be around. And just a few days ago, Target, one of America's leading retailing chain, is closing down 9 of their stores because the level of robbery, the level of theft was so high that they cannot open their stores anymore. It is not just in one city, it's across America. And this is happening when US unemployment rate is at 3.5, 3.6% at a level which is almost unheard of for the last 60 years. Right? At a time when Biden keeps saying economy is doing well, economy is doing well. Of course, he doesn't look at his own popularity ranking. His popularity has remained at an extremely low level. And in a recent survey by Reuters and Ipsos, where they surveyed the Americans, a big majority says that the country is going in the wrong direction. It doesn't take a smart person to see that. Anyone can see that the America that is being run is going in the wrong direction. Next. We heard of flash mob, but America has created something else. They call flash rob, R-O-B. What happens is, out of the blue, suddenly you have a group of people who will rush, and this happens mainly in the high-end departmental stores, the luxury departmental stores, those like your Balenciaga, your Yves Saint Laurent, and so on and so forth. So suddenly you have a group of them rushing in and robbing the store and grabbing the things away. It happens in LA, it happens in San Francisco, and companies there, I mean, even a company like Dick's Sporting Goods, which sells sporting goods, their earnings have been affected because they couldn't control it. It's so rampant that the retail industry in US estimated that they have lost something like 100 billion US dollars due to this kind of very creative type of robbery. Why? In an economy which is seeing record unemployment rate? Of course, you have high inflation. You have a government that doesn't bother to take care of the ordinary people, right? That's more interested in bullying China, that's more interested in spending billions and billions to Ukraine to go and fight Russia. I mean, what kind of government is that? You don't take care of your own citizens. So, I mean, I can go on, but it's already 12:30. I apologize. We started early because we couldn't get our camera working, we couldn't get our sound working. But the point I'm putting across is America is a ticking time bomb, right? Now, before I give you my conclusion, let me go through some of the comments. We received quite a bit of comments here, right? Okay, the first one is from Fong. I don't know whether it's Mr. Fong or Miss Fong or whatever it is. Says that a bear market in the US stock market will affect stock markets around the world. 7 years ago, when the US stock market was lower than it is, ICAP, which is our closed-end fund, was holding relatively high cash. Now, the US stock market is at a high level. ICAP cash level is lower than previously. So do I think that the Bursa stock market can withstand the impact of the US stock market this time? Interesting question. Let me put it this way, Miss Fong or Mr. Fong. Hong Kong stock market has dropped, but the Hang Seng Index has dropped something like 45%. So do you think a bear market in New York and Nasdaq would push the Hong Kong index further down? Would it push the Chinese stocks further down? I don't think so. I think the fact that Bursa has not really gone up or down, I mean, it hasn't really gone up, it hasn't really gone down in the recent months, is because there hasn't been much foreign interest. And if there isn't much foreign interest in the first place, even if New York crashes, when New York crashes, not if, when New York crashes, there's hardly any foreigners selling. Locals usually don't sell because we just hold our stocks. So a lot of the selling at the margin comes from the foreign selling. So if they are not really present in Malaysia in the first place, there's nothing much for them to sell after all. So to answer your question, I think when the US market drops further, I think markets like Bursa, markets like the Chinese stocks, or even some of the other underperforming stock markets would most likely be able to not only hold up, they might even receive fresh inflow of funds because these foreign funds may want to look for better, safer places. The market that worries me the most when New York crashes is the Tokyo stock market. The Tokyo stock market is at the bubble level, is at levels which have never been seen for a long time. And what is worrying about Tokyo is not just that the stock market is bubbly, Tokyo properties are also at a bubble level. In an international research paper, the second most overvalued the second most overvalued property market in the world is Tokyo. So when New York crashes, Tokyo stock market will crash and it will pull the Tokyo property market down as well. So Japan might see the second bursting of their bubble. So I was a lot more worried about Japan than our Malaysian stock market. Our question of whether US is a ticking time bomb, I think based on those who answered, 99% say yes. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'll add my vote in and make it 100%. And then this person says, Alibaba, let me read his comment. I think it's a walking time bomb that walked to all over the world. Yes and no. If I interpret the comment correctly, is that it's going to have global repercussions. In terms of stock market, as I mentioned earlier, I think there'll be selected stock markets that will be more resilient than others. There'll be some, like Tokyo is the one that worries me the most. Tokyo and Mumbai, that may be affected the most. But if you look beyond the stock market, right, when the US time bomb explodes, China is not going to be affected. Russia is not going to be affected. A lot of countries where they've got a lot of trade and economic ties with China will be relatively safe. So in that sense, our current Prime Minister, who has been pretty active in trying to get investments with China, trade with China, assuming that those succeed, then Malaysia would be in a pretty strong, pretty resilient position. So the global economy has really sort of divided into two, in a sense that the US has gone in its own direction, and then there's the global south, which is driven basically by China, Africa, Latin America, a big part of Asia. Those, I think, would be relatively, generally speaking, relatively resilient, right? If you look at Korean exports, Taiwan exports, Singapore exports, they have been dropping for more than a year, even though the US economy is booming. That's because of the slowdown in the Chinese growth. So when the Chinese growth re-accelerate, which I think is really starting to happen, then these countries will be able to benefit. A country like Australia, where 40% of Australia's exports go to China, Australia will be a lot more resilient. So I don't think that this US time bomb would be able to walk all over the world. This year, the IMF did a long-term forecast for the next 5 years. It says that Chinese economy will contribute about 23-24% to global GDP, compared with US only about 12%. In other words, the contribution of Chinese economic growth will be double that of America. So I'm not concerned with the US time bomb affecting the rest of the world. I think my take is this, my interpretation is this. It will benefit global stability, it will benefit global peace. Because a US economy that's floundering, a US stock market that's plunging, means that America cannot be such a busybody in the rest of the world. And if America is not such a busybody in the rest of the world, then all of us can live in peace. Private investor, US is insanely printing trillions of dollars year in, year out, and we and other countries are joining in this madness just to stay competitive. Partially true, partially not true. Countries like Japan continuously to use weird kind of quantitative easing, but China has been very disciplined. China has refused to join this printing of money, and therefore their money supply has been under control. The growth in money supply. Fu Wenbing says US and Western just keep eyes on China economic slowdown when themselves already in the pool of shit. I agree with you. Germany is really in recession. Netherlands is really in recession. But they don't seem to do anything about their own economy, and US is about to enter one. I'm very convinced that the US will be facing a recession soon. But what to do? Their democracy is not really functioning because they cannot kick out the politicians and find the politicians that are more responsible. We hear a lot about the CHIPS Act, right? The CHIPS Act, which is supposed to bring semiconductor back to America. You hear about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is it's actually a misnomer. It's called Inflation Reduction Act, but it's actually nothing to do with that. Anyway, these two acts are inflation. This was signed into law in August 2022. These two acts are very inflationary in nature. Even Larry Summers says that Biden's economic policies are worsening the inflation situation in US. S.H. Tan comment is have the audacity of preaching labor rights. Talking about labor rights, they always say that if your goods are made if your goods are made in Xinjiang, you cannot buy the goods and so on and so forth, blah blah blah. But do you know what? There was a suit filed by, I cannot remember which African country, which African citizen filed a suit in the American Supreme Court against Coca-Cola and Nestle, that Coca-Cola and Nestle were abusing labor rights, were exploiting the African workers in Africa to make their products. And they wanted the Supreme Court to make a judgment that Nestle and Coca-Cola are acting illegally. You know what the US Supreme Court says? US Supreme Court has got no legal rights to make judgment on American companies operating in a foreign country. But how come they can make judgment when the company is operating in Xinjiang? Isn't Xinjiang in a foreign country in China? But when it's operating in Africa, sorry, we don't have the judicial rights. What kind of double standard bullshit is this? Okay. Private investor says US politics is monopolized by just two parties. Totally agreed. That's why Robert Kennedy Jr., I think one of the sons of the Kennedy family, one of the people from the Kennedy family, is going to stand for election. He's not going to stand as a Republican. He's not going to stand as a Democrat. That's interesting. I hope he stands as an independent, and I hope he wins. C.A. Lim says US competitiveness has been declining for the last 10 years due to its complacency to continue challenging status quo. It won't be surprising US will be losing its edge to China and other emerging countries like Asia. US required to break away from the partisan system and another great leader before it can reclaim its glory era. More or less, I agree with the comment. My view is that the U.S. economy, the U.S. is only as strong as its stock market. When the U.S. stock market crashes, the U.S. economy, the U.S. political system will crumble. That is the country. That is what the country is made of. I mean, all you, if let's say we're lucky, let's say the NY and the NASDAQ crashes 30-40%, and you see what happens to the economy. SH Tan asked, what is my view on the US decoupling? Will it realistically happen anytime soon? Anytime soon, no. Over time, yes, because a lot of emerging countries are fed up. Malaysia is fed up. Thailand is fed up. Indonesia is fed up. Saudi Arabia is fed up. Turkey is fed up. Argentina is fed up. Brazil is fed up. That the US, every time the US dollar strengthens, the US dollar interest rate goes up, we get affected. Yes, the global south wants to decouple. Takes time. Be patient. Private investor, US gold strength is very strong, and they dictate terms to all, especially the Western countries, Japan and South Korea. Agreed. I mean, it's a fact. You can see for yourself, right? I've told my European friends, I said, why are you all so passive? Do you know that your European banking industry and also the British banking industry has already been conquered by the American banks? 20 years ago, 25 years ago, British would have Barclays Bank, National Westminster Bank, and some of their famous investment banks like Schroders and so on and so forth. And in Europe, you used to have Credit Suisse, right? You used to have so many of the investment banks that were world class. For example, like your Deutsche Bank, your Dresdner Bank, or your BNP from France. All of them have been somehow squashed by American banks. The big global banks now are your JP Morgan, right? Your Citibank. All of them are Americans. There's no more British, no more American. Of course, the Japanese lost a long time ago. So I don't understand. They're going to do, United States is going to do the same thing to the semicon industry. Very soon, if the Taiwanese are not smart enough, I hope the Taiwanese people are smarter than what I think they are. If they're not smart enough, very soon, TSMC will not be a Taiwanese company. And whatever technology that TSMC has would have been transferred to America, Arizona. You look at what happened to Japan in the 1980s, where the United States used the same coercive economic and foreign policy to squash Japan. And Japan lost their manufacturing leads. Japan used to be a global semiconductor leader, ahead of Korea, ahead of Taiwan. But they lost. And your Hitachi and all those are no longer major players. So the semiconductor industry better watch, especially those in Korea, in South Korea, in Japan, in Taiwan. Very soon, you have nothing left. Okay. Well, I think we've said enough. My point is, what is the fuse that will blow up this American time bomb? It is their stock market. All you need is for NASDAQ and the New York stock market to plunge 20, 30, 40%, the time bomb will all blow up. Right? By then, they got no choice. Even if inflation rate is not dropping, they got no choice but to cut interest rate. Then they'll get trapped even more in stagflation. You see yesterday's personal consumption PCE, the price index, which was released yesterday, right? The headline inflation rate jumped up to 0.4. The core inflation rate, which is X energy, X food, went down. Normally, when that happens, the US stock markets would have rallied because, wow, good, inflation coming down. Therefore, US interest rates can pause and start being cut. But the Dow Jones plunged 100 over points. NASDAQ hardly moved, despite a supposedly favorable inflation report. Why? Because you cannot ignore headline inflation. People say, the US Federal Reserve will look at the core inflation, which is X energy, X food. That is in a normal situation. We are not in a normal situation. The inflation report was for August. Now it's really almost end of September. In the month of September, energy price, oil price, whether it's crude oil or diesel, have gone up a lot. So if this situation continues, which I think will continue because Saudi Arabia and Russia have cooperated and cut supply, the inventory of oil in US are extremely low. The inventory is usually, you watch Cushing in Oklahoma. It's a very small town, about 10,000 people, but it's a very important town for crude oil. The oil which is stored there is at a very low level. It's at such a low level because for the oil tanks to function, it cannot drop too low. Then there's not enough pressure for you to move your oil. So the inventory of this oil in Cushing is at such a low level that even though you still have oil inside the oil tank, you cannot move them. So in other words, you have shortage of supply from Saudi Arabia and Russia. Inventory in US is extremely low. Demand is strong. The head of oil markets in the International Energy Agency, this was in August last month, she said that demand of oil in China has been surprisingly very strong. So you have a supply-demand situation of energy which is in favor of further rises in oil price, which means what? Headline inflation is going to worsen. If headline inflation is going to worsen, don't you think it's going to affect your core inflation? Because, I'm an ordinary American worker. I need to eat headline inflation. I need to buy oil. I need to buy food. You cannot say, I can ignore energy price, I cannot food price because these are not core. I need them. So when it eats into my purchasing power, I ask for more wage increase. So headline inflation in this current situation is unusually important. The Federal Reserve will have to pay attention to headline inflation. And unfortunately, oil price is going to go higher. So I hope that this feels right, that I'm looking for, that the US market plunges further, will actually happen. It will make the world a safer place. It will make the ringgit stop depreciating against the US dollar. So maybe if all of us can pray, then the NASDAQ and the NY can drop another 30%, we have a safer world, a more peaceful world. Well, I guess we have a few more questions, but we will not go into that because it's already 12:30. I hope you have enjoyed my views. You may not agree with them, it's okay. I'm just giving you my views. They're based on, as you can see, based on very deep research. I do things, when I research very deeply. I can even tell you the inventory level in Cushing, which is in Oklahoma, and to be able to link everything. Economic side, monetary policy, inflation, with social problems in US, flash rob, homelessness, right? And security problem, crime. And then to link it with America's very ineffective political system. I hope you've gained something from it. And if you have any other topics that you want me to be talking about in future, please send your comments to us. And don't forget, like us and share whoever you can share with, whatever we have said this morning. And then at the end of the day, if you want, subscribe to www.icapital.biz. It's only 99 ringgit a year. With that, I thank you again and have a good weekend.